Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs, and become a patron today to show your support and get instant access to our extensive archive of downloadable ad-free tales of terror. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show.
Disclaimer. Horror Hill is a horror anthology podcast bringing you scary stories from all corners of the internet and beyond. As such, certain stories include content that some listeners might find offensive. Listener discretion is advised. Good evening, listeners, and welcome back to Horror Hill. I'm your host, Erik Peabody, and we're going to be featuring two stories tonight by Shane H. Sellers, a new author to the show. We'll begin with Shelter Games, a heartwarming story about a group of friends playing games together to get through a tough situation. The tough situation in question is that they're stuck in a bomb shelter while the outside world is falling to pieces. Well, most of them are stuck in a bomb shelter. One friend, Steven, ventured outside a while back, and though it becomes apparent that he's changed a bit since he left, he still wants to play a game. After that, we'll close out with Something Ate My Work Crew at the Old Reed Place. In this story, our protagonist Zach is a jack-of-all-trades construction worker. His newest job is with a team of guys clearing out a 30-acre patch of woods for a new apartment complex. It turns out that Zach's crew isn't the first to be assigned to this site, and, if you haven't yet guessed from the title, Zach's about to learn why. You're listening to the standard edition of this program. If you'd like to help support Horror Hill and also remove these pesky ads, head to chillingtalesfordarknights.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. You'll get instant access to hundreds of ad-free stories, and we can scale back some of our less savory means of generating money for the show. By the way, you wouldn't happen to still have all of your organs, would you? And now, from author Shane H. Sellers, I give you Shelter Games. The red, translucent dice rolled across the table, landing on a pair of threes. A loud exhale of defeat followed as Jeremy reached down and removed the miniature plastic models from the table. "Damn it," Timothy said, looking away in disgust. Jeremy moved to the center of the table on the opposite end to grab his own set of green dice. "I get to fire a volley into your retreating squad," Jeremy said proudly. I shifted in my chair, looking at the arrangement of the crafted miniature terrain made from cardboard and other materials. The small buildings and roads resembled our town, only in a post-apocalyptic setting. The detail was quite extraordinary, down to individually crafted shingles and shattered windows. The burnt hull of a car sat in the middle of a cracked road with small bits of paper and other trash glued down to up the desolation factor. Jeremy and Stephen had spent months crafting the board, which ran the total length of 2 8-foot folding tables stacked side by side. Not only was the board intricately detailed, but Stephen had 3D printed and crafted items to go inside the various houses. One could simply lift the roof off one of the small houses to discover it packed with appliances and furniture of all types. Jeremy rolled his set of green dice, coming up with 5s and 6s. "That's game, bitch!" he said, removing the last figures from the board. Timothy sulked for a moment before extending his hand in a display of sportsmanship. Jeremy smiled and shook it with energetic glee. "So, what now?" I said, yawning and stretching my arms. "Let's play Deathbringer," Timothy said with an excited fervor. Jeremy moaned at the suggestion, taking a moment to consider his reply. "You know, without Otark, the party'll just get slain, right?" Otark was Stephen's character, a second-level fighter that acted as the party's primary melee output. Stephen had ventured out of the bomb shelter a week ago and was now something inhuman. We had tried to warn him several times not to leave the shelter, but he wouldn't give up the idea that his family might still be alive. One night, after we had all crashed from playing 8 hours of Kingdom Death Monster, he snuck out. Jeremy was royally pissed, not so much about the bad things getting inside the shelter, but more about the fact that we now had a stalled game that we couldn't finish. Jeremy was almost fanatical about finishing games. One time, we paused a game of Axis and Allies the night before I went to East Carolina University. After 2 semesters, I returned home to discover Jeremy still had the same game set up, waiting to be completed. Timothy raked his hands through his long blonde hair, sending flakes of dandruff floating in the air. His face, a sheen of oil and acne, glistened under the fluorescent light of the underground shelter. We had been friends since middle school, and Timothy often confided in me when he felt nervous about things. He was smart, but like me, he didn't care for the demands of the world, choosing instead to invest in fantasy and role-playing games. "What if we tried to finish the campaign without him?" Timothy said. Jeremy shot a look of contempt back towards Timothy, answering without saying a word. "Time to eat?" I asked, looking toward the kitchen. "Yeah, I'm pretty hungry," Jeremy said, using his shirt to clean the lenses of his glasses. "MRE, Mountain House, ramen, or canned soup?" Timothy said, walking towards the kitchen. I groaned at the menu options before replying, "I'll take ramen." "MRE, but see if there's any chili mac left," Jeremy said. Timothy scratched his face before opening the overhead cabinet and rifling through the contents. The bomb shelter belonged to Jeremy's father, a man that I had never met before. From bits and pieces of conversation over the last 5 years, I concluded that he was very wealthy, lived abroad, and basically threw money at any issue. As for a mother, I never heard Jeremy speak about one, so I figured she was pretty much out of the picture. The bomb shelter was actually very large, with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a living room with a kitchen, and a large storage room. Jeremy fantasized about post-apocalyptic scenarios, stocking the shelter with various survival tools, emergency food rations, and state-of-the-art surveillance equipment, using his father's platinum credit card. After several years, we turned the shelter into our own private hangout, converting 2 of the bedrooms into game rooms with enough toys and action figures to rival any game store. Being around Jeremy was like being around a rich uncle, only you had to stay on his good side. One time, we went to a local game store and he bought the latest Warhammer game set, complete with paints and army codex. Without missing a beat, he turned to me and asked where my army was. When I explained the cost was just too high and I would continue to use my orcs, he pointed to the shelves and said, "Orcs are lame. Pick another army." $500 later, I walked out with a new Imperial Guard set. But like I said, Jeremy was spoiled and treated the rest of us as subordinates. It was an unspoken rule that Jeremy didn't lift a finger unless Jeremy wanted to. That meant carrying his book bag, cleaning his room, driving his car, and preparing his meals. You also didn't win every game. It was okay to win a few, here and there, but you had to feed his ego. One time, Timothy was on a winning streak playing Nemesis, and Jeremy had had enough, ordering Stephen and I to hold Timothy down while he drew a dick on his forehead with a permanent marker. To add insult to injury, he made Timothy continue to play the night with a giant inked penis plastered on his forehead. Things continued like this for years, and one game night, Jeremy, Stephen, Timothy, and I were playing games like we always did in the bomb shelter, when our phones lit up with warning messages. Images of dark vortexes in the sky popped up. News alerts about massive creatures surfacing from the ocean. In one video, a massive tentacle the size of a skyscraper whipped about off the coast of Myrtle Beach. Then more reports about people committing acts of depravity and violence. It was like the world changed in a matter of minutes. Our neighborhood was soon engulfed in a green mist. Trees uprooted themselves and moved freely about. Grotesque abominations hid in the shadows of backyards. I remember watching as Esmeralda, Jeremy's maid, scratched her own eyes out in the front yard of his house. Things got dark really fast, and before we knew it, we were running for our lives back to the underground hideout. We closed the hatch on the shelter and cowered in the back storage room for 2 days. Fortunately, the shelter seemed to protect us from everything outside. Jeremy assured us he had enough supplies to last at least 5 years, that number changing to 8 when Stephen ventured out of the shelter. Timothy returned to the table where we sat, handing me a cup of hot ramen and an MRE bag to Jeremy. Jeremy tore the bag open, retrieving the main entree and the green heater bag. He placed the entree of chili mac inside the heater and proceeded to pour water over it until a chemical reaction occurred, causing the green bag to inflate. Once the heater was activated, he folded the edges of the bag and propped it against the leg of the table to continue cooking. "So, I had this idea for a new game," Jeremy said, emptying the rest of the MRE contents onto the table. Timothy and I both looked at each other. New games were always something to worry about, and it usually resulted in one of us being humiliated. "What did you have in mind?" Timothy said, a hint of trepidation in his voice. "You know Stephen's still outside walking around, right?" Jeremy said, opening a packet of peanut butter with his teeth. "But isn't he, changed?" I said, taking a bite of the hot noodles. "Yup, he's butt-fucking ugly as shit, which is an improvement over what he used to look like," Jeremy said with a laugh. Timothy pulled the wrapper off a chocolate moon pie before responding. "So, you've seen him?" "Oh yeah. The dumb fucker's trapped in the backyard. Can't figure out how to open a stupid gate. I can see him good on one of the shelter cams," Jeremy said, squirting a glob of peanut butter into his open mouth. The sentiment in which Jeremy spoke about Stephen made me uncomfortable. We all had grown up with Stephen, went to movies with him, had birthday parties. Now he was being portrayed as some moronic nobody, all because he cared about his family more than being safe. "I was thinking we try talking to him on the gate intercom, see if we can get a rise out of him or something," Jeremy said, now shifting to his heated entree. Timothy took a small bite of the moon pie, a look of apprehension written on his face. I crossed my arms, a sudden chill in the air despite the hot, steaming noodles in front of me. Jeremy sat down his entree, motioning us to the media room, where two 15-inch monitors were set up, displaying the outside of the bunker. In the past few weeks, I had learned not to stare at the images on the camera for too long, unless I wanted nightmares. In the first few days, we watched the cameras non-stop with morbid fascination. There was nothing more enthralling than live-action footage of the apocalypse being broadcasted directly to you in the safety of your bunker. Jeremy sat in the gaming chair, fumbling with the mouse and enlarging the backyard camera feed. The footage was black and white, an indication it was dark outside and being recorded in infrared. The backyard was unchanged as I remembered it. A good-sized pool in the center where we used to lounge during the hot summers. Manicured holly bushes on the west side of the property, a stone path leading to the wrought iron backyard gate, and there was Stephen, hunched beside it. Jeremy zoomed the camera in on Stephen, the footage now more grainy, but still able to pick out the inhuman qualities he exhibited. "What the fuck is wrong with his face?" Timothy exclaimed. "I told you, it's an improvement," Jeremy said with a sneer. Stephen's body was now host to all manners of repulsion. Viscous fluid leaked from open boils. Worms the size of thick cables squirmed underneath his stretched skin. Black thorns resembling horns protruded from his face. Jeremy pulled an intercom microphone close to his lips and spoke. "What's up, dickhead?" I cringed at the comment, sticking my hands into my pockets and looking to Timothy, who stared intently at the display screen. "Hey, dumb fuck, I'm talking to you," Jeremy said with a laugh. Stephen's head twitched towards the gate intercom as he inspected it with the wonderment of a small child. Jeremy leaned forward in his chair, this time speaking in a sing-song rhythm. "Stephen, hello, can you hear me?" Stephen's body stood straight as he reached for the intercom, pushing the call button. A ghostly voice echoed through. "Hello, Jeremy." Jeremy sat back in his chair, trying to mask a sense of fear that was evident in his movements. "I had forgotten about you all, but it's all coming back to me now," Stephen said, his voice a mixture of several other voices, both human and inhuman. "Cut it off, Jeremy, please," Timothy said, moving towards the intercom module. Jeremy, snapping out of his haze, jerked the intercom away from Timothy. "God help you if you touch my intercom," Jeremy said, a voice steeped in anger. Unsettled by Stephen's reply, I spoke up. "Jeremy, I don't like this game. Let's play something else." Jeremy looked at me, then back to Timothy, and then spoke into the microphone. "Stephen, you don't scare me. You look more pathetic now than you did before the end of the world. How about doing me a favor and fucking die?" This time, Stephen turned around until his grotesque face stared directly into the camera. With an outstretched arm, he mashed the intercom button. "I think it's time we play my game, Jeremy." The camera screen flickered bright and then went to static, followed by a loud screeching noise that caused me to step away from the media station. I could see Timothy also retreating, his fingers stuffed in his ears, eyes closed from the awful noise. Jeremy dropped to the floor, pulling at cables until the intercom went silent. My heart pounding, I stepped forward, wiping the sweat from my face. "What the fuck, Jeremy?" I screamed. Jeremy, clearly shaken, pulled himself up to the game chair and swirled it around to face Timothy and me. He took a few deep breaths before a smile formed across his face. "Woohoo! That was crazy, man!" Jeremy said, his face turning a bright shade of red. Timothy exhaled loudly, bringing both hands to rest on top of his head. Fuck me, that was intense! Both Jeremy and Timothy started to laugh, when suddenly a shelter alarm went off. We all glanced at each other with scared, confused looks. That's the decontamination alarm, Jeremy said, bolting from his seat and running towards the shelter entrance. Both Timothy and I followed closely behind, watching as he disengaged the large steel hatch leading to the air purification room. Once inside, he made his way over to the entrance door, pressing the power to a 6-inch monitor fastened to the wall. The monitor glowed to life, revealing Stephen with a host of other monstrous creatures packed tightly within the confines of the small decontamination room. Stephen peered into the monitor with an oversized reptilian eye that darted back and forth. We stood frozen in terror as slimy tentacles pressed firmly against the bulkhead, making the outer hatch groan. He can't get in here, can he? I said, a sense of panic echoing in the words. Jeremy looked to me, his body trembling. No, I don't think so. Weapons, man! We gotta get weapons! Timothy exclaimed. Jeremy nodded, ushering us out of the room and sealing the hatch behind him. We rushed into the master bedroom, where Jeremy dropped to the floor, pulling a hard rifle case from under the bed. With shaky hands, he opened the case, revealing an AR-15 rifle with a few boxes of ammo and 2 empty magazines. What about us? Timothy asked. Jeremy pointed to his dresser, where a cheap katana sword sat on display. You bought that for $20 at a flea market! Timothy shouted. Jeremy ignored his rebuttal, ripping one of the cardboard ammunition boxes open, the shiny brass shells falling on top of the bed comforter. Jeremy picked one of the bullets up, looking at it, and then back to the rifle with a look of puzzlement. You know how to use that, right? I questioned. An ear-splitting roar of torn steel reverberated through the shelter, causing Jeremy to involuntarily jump. I pushed past Timothy and grabbed one of the steel magazines, loading the shell into it as fast as I could. Jeremy, visibly shaken, relented and walked to the corner of the room, staring out the entrance. I finished loading the magazine with the last of the bullets and slammed it into the rifle. Taking a step towards the door, I charged the bolt, then placed the weapon on fire. Another loud crash came from down the hall, signaling the last hatch had been breached. Stephen and his companions were now inside. The shelter lights dimmed and went dark. For a moment, we sat in pitch black until the red glow of emergency lighting flickered on. We backed against the bedroom wall, dropping to our knees and seeking cover behind the bed. For a moment, the room was silent, except for our collective breathing. The air was saturated with the smell of body odor and dread that seemed to linger in the cool confines of the steel shelter. My eyes stayed focused on the doorway, seeking movement within the crimson hues of the emergency lighting. I gotta piss, Timothy whimpered. Shut up, stupid, Jeremy hissed. Is there an emergency exit? I whispered. Jeremy seemed to be lost in thought for a moment, but then turned to me in revelation. In the storage room, there's a small hatch that leads outside, Jeremy whispered. I nodded my head and stepped forward, raising the rifle in the air. Quietly, we moved out of the bedroom into the main hall and began to backtrack through the kitchen. Shadows danced on the walls, accompanied by wet, sloshing sounds. The storage room was straight ahead, past the game table where we had just sat moments ago. My steps quickened, both Timothy and Jeremy matching my pace. We were feet away when Stephen's guttural voice stopped us dead in our tracks. Where are you going? We turned slowly to see Stephen in the kitchen, his features disproportionate to his body but concealed in the dim light. I could make out what appeared to be a series of giant crab-like legs that protruded from his body, propelling him across the floor. The walls of the shelter were adorned with large flesh-like tumors and eyes that thirsted for blood. My fear was interrupted by a sound that I had heard many times before, the sound of plastic impacting against a surface, the sound of dice being rolled. In front of us, a single 20-sided die rolled, coming to a stop at our feet. Keeping my eyes on Stephen, I knelt, taking the plastic icosahedron die in hand. "Let's play your game," Stephen said, his voice now twisting in on itself. Timothy pressed tightly against me as one of the wall tumors transformed into a set of needle-like teeth. "Rules?" I shouted. 10 or higher. You walk. I looked to Timothy and then to Jeremy, an unspoken collective fear shared amongst the group. Turning back to Stephen, I swallowed hard, grasping the die firmly in my right hand. My stomach gurgled, and my legs shook with anxiety. Closing my eyes, I released the die, allowing it to fall freely to the floor. A few seconds passed before I opened my eyes and looked down. The numbers were too small to make out in the dim light, forcing me to stoop down. I took the die between my thumb and index finger, careful not to disturb the face-up number, and brought it close to my face. 12, I said, a feeling of relief washing over me. "Yes, we're free!" Timothy exclaimed. "No, he's free," Stephen interrupted. Timothy's excited face turned pale as the realization hit him. I placed the 20-sided die into his hands and nodded. Timothy swallowed hard and rolled. The clatter of plastic on the vinyl floor seemed to be the only audible sound in the shelter. The die came to a stop 2 feet away from our group. Timothy stood still, prompting me to nudge him on his shoulder. He moved forward, picking it up as I had done earlier. Breathing deeply, he inspected the die and then looked to Stephen. 14. Timothy then handed the die to Jeremy. Jeremy looked down at the die, as he had done so many times before, and stepped forward. There was a stagger in his step, as if he knew the odds. He looked to Stephen, holding the die up in front of him. "You could never beat me then, and you won't now," he said before shaking the die in his left hand and letting it fly with confidence. The die hit the shelter floor, tumbling a good 4 feet away before coming to a rest. Jeremy pushed past us, retrieving it. Bringing the die closer to his face, he adjusted his glasses, trying to make out the number. Jeremy went rigid, dropping the die to the ground and looking back to us. "No way, man. I can re-roll," he said, walking towards us. A long tentacle covered in hairy spines shot out from the darkness, wrapping itself around Jeremy's waist. He struggled to free himself, his face going blank as he looked up to us. Blood began to seep from his nose and eyes. Jeremy grimaced, bringing his hand up to his face and pushing his glasses free as the tentacle coiled more tightly around his body. Jeremy stretched his arms out towards us, silently pleading for us to save him. I grabbed Timothy by his shoulder and pulled him to the storage room. There, I unlocked the escape hatch and shoved him inside. We both climbed to the top using a ladder, then released the last hatch for our escape. I stumbled out, making my way to Timothy, who stood motionless, looking toward the sky. His blonde hair was now white, and his eyes bulged in the moonlight. In the sky, blue lightning ripped through the air as titanic creatures swirled in the clouds. Behind us, a deformed tree moved across the neighbor's backyard. On the street, a procession of people chanted strange and unnatural words to the heavens. You've been listening to Shelter Games by Shane H. Sellers. And now, also from Shane H. Sellers, I present Something Ate My Work Crew at the Old Reed Place. My name is Zach, and I'm a construction worker, mainly an earth mover. But I've done it all. Paving, logging, building, digging, cleanup. Basically, I'm the guy that you see in that bright orange vest and hard hat sweating his ass off on a hot summer day. The work is hard, and at times grueling. Nothing like 16-hour shifts 7 days a week to make you question the decisions you've made in life. That's blue-collar work for you. Waking up at the crack of dawn, hitting your pillow at 0 dark 30, and repeating the whole process the next day. The food is terrible, unless you've got a wife or girlfriend making you something. Usually, the finest gas station cuisine or the cheapest buffet in town suffices. If you've got a good foreman, you might get a cooler full of ice water or a porta potty to take a shit in. However, he might be pinching his pennies trying to pay rent or alimony, so don't ever count on it. Some of us are in dire straits, suffering from addictions, bad women, bad men, stupidity, legal woes, lack of citizenship, money problems, you name it. Some of us just enjoy an honest dollar and can't be contained in the confines of an office. No matter who we are, we're hard-working, tough sons of bitches, at least those that make it through a season or two. If you're lucky, you get on a state-run crew with better pay, OSHA-mandated breaks, and an emphasis on safety. But for most of us, it's a private organization that acts as a third party. This means you could be cutting a road 1 month and then find yourself shoveling snow for a small neighborhood. You go where there's work and save your pennies until the next project. I've worked 2 years with my crew doing every back-breaking project you can think of. So, when I got an offer for pay and a half on an apartment complex project, I was instantly on board. In addition to the pay, the contract promised daily per diem and free hotel stay until the job's completion. There was also a bonus incentive if the work was completed within a month. I'd never seen such a lucrative contract and was suspicious at first. After digging around on the internet, I discovered the project had seen nothing but hardship since its purchase a year ago. Apparently, workers just left or went missing after only a few days on the job. Some big-time real estate broker and 2 others died in an accident back in 2021. The property had changed ownership several times and now belonged to a bank. I figured it was the same bullshit as always. I call them the P's. Piss-poor planning, punk-ass workers, pussy project management. When you get a case of the P's on a project, buckle up, because shit is gonna get costly. I got in my truck and drove to North Carolina from West Virginia on Sunday. Checked in at the Motel 6 that evening and got to the site the following Monday at 5:40 a.m. David White was sitting on his tailgate smoking a cigarette as I drove up. I'd worked with David on a few projects and found him somewhat pleasant to be around. The guy was in his late 30s, lean from years of hard labor and a permanent tan from working outdoors, arms covered in faded tattoos. I think he was married 3 times and was quite rowdy in his younger days. I parked my truck, got out, and nodded to David as he flicked the cigarette to the ground. David tossed me his lighter as I pulled a fresh pack of Newports from my pocket. I took 2 cigarettes from the pack, lighting one and putting it to my lips. Using the lit cigarette, I then lit the other and passed it to David. I put the lighter back into my pants pocket. "Hey, fucker, that's my lighter," David said. "We both know you ain't got no cigarettes left," I said, smiling back. David threw up his hands in acceptance. "It ain't too late to run. Foreman ain't showed up yet. You could be home by midday if you left now, David said, a smile cracking across his unshaven face. And leave you with all this fun? I replied, making my way across to sit beside him on the tailgate. The site wasn't much to write home about, but I was surprised how wooded it still was. Usually, one of the first things to get done is cutting down the trees, but the entire 30 acres seemed almost untouched, complete with a vacant 2-story house. This was going to require some long days to complete if we wanted to collect that bonus. Anybody else we know on the project? I asked. Good news is you got Randy, Jackson, Juan, and his brother Antonio. Bad news is you got Larry Hodges as the foreman, David replied. That sick fuck, I exclaimed. Larry was an overweight shitbag that was known in the industry as a modern-day slave master. A shift with Larry was like working on a prison chain gang. The fat bastard was sadistic and a sick pervert. Rumor was you watched your ass around Larry, or he would be up in it. He tended to leave the old-timers alone, but God help you if you were some young kid. Yeah, well, at least it's just a month, David said, sweat already starting to form on his brow. In a few more minutes, Jackson and Randy drove up in a rusted Oldsmobile. Jackson was a large black man with a well-groomed beard who stood almost 6'7". Randy was a small, middle-aged white man with a receding hairline that he kept covered with a sweat-stained ball cap. The two were known as the odd couple because they just didn't match at all, but you always saw them together. I think they were both in Iraq. Always joked they had traded one shit job for another one. The only difference was they didn't have to worry about extremists trying to blow them up. David, Zach, Jackson said, shutting the door to the car. Randy put on a pair of dirty work gloves and grabbed a large cooler from the trunk of the car, just as Juan and Antonio parked their Honda Civic. Hola, Senor Randy, Juan said as he passed the Oldsmobile, touching the tip of his hard hat. Antonio, the younger brother, followed closely behind Juan, saying nothing. A few minutes passed by as our crew mingled together. The yellow and orange hues of dawn stretched across the sky. David checked his watch and sat up from the tailgate, taking a moment to stretch. Lastly, a young teenage boy came walking down the dirt road pushing a bicycle. The kid was pale, with a face full of freckles and soft hands that hadn't seen work before. He seemed to move with a shy awkwardness, his tall and lanky body showing nervousness as he propped his bicycle on its kickstand. Hey, Junior, school's that way, David said, pointing back down the road. I'm here to work, the kid responded. Fuck, you gotta be kidding me, David retorted. Well, didn't much matter when they sent us to Iraq, Randy said. Oh, shut the fuck up about Iraq, Randy, David chided. The moment was interrupted as Larry waddled up behind us, handkerchief wiping the sweat from his forehead. His face was red from exertion as he leaned against David's truck, taking out a notepad from his shirt pocket. From now on, you motherfuckers park down here, Larry said, pointing to the vacant 2-story house. All right, time to get to work. If you're black or brown, you're bringing it down. Go grab chainsaws from my work truck. Racist motherfucker, Jackson said. You got a problem, Tyrone? Larry shouted back. It's Jackson, you hillbilly fuck. I don't care if it's Chicken George. You want to work? You shut them big lips or you get the fuck off my site, Larry said, spittle forming at the corners of his mouth. We're here to work, Mr. Hodges, Randy said, pulling Jackson to the side. Larry stared at Jackson for a moment, then spoke. That's good. Real good. David and Zach, you're my earth movers. I want you two in the cats moving what gets cut down. Randy, you're on woodpile duty. I want them branches stacked high for burning. What about me, sir? The kid interrupted. A look of confusion washed across Larry's face as his eyes met the kid. He looked down to the notepad in his hand and then back to the kid. Ronald Sheffer? Larry asked, a broad smile forming across his face. Ronnie, sir, the kid replied. Kid, you're the bitch today. You make the equipment runs. If you get tired, you come down and sit in the shade with me, you hear? Larry said, unconsciously licking his lips. As for the rest of you, I want 5 acres cleared before the day's end. I see you on a phone, your ass is off my sight, Larry said, clapping his hands together. The crew made for the tools and heavy equipment, while Larry waddled back to the shaded front porch of the vacant home. Then he sat in a beach chair and started to play with his phone. Jackson pulled the kid aside as he lifted a chainsaw from the bed of the work truck. You better watch yourself around that man. He ain't your friend. You get me? The kid nodded as David rounded the side of the truck, placing his hand on the kid's shoulder. All right, boy. You put gas cans down there by the wood line where the cutting's going on. It's the small cans with oil mixed in, not the big ones. Don't fuck that up. If somebody tells you to do something, you do it. I see you sitting on your ass, you'll get my fist in your face. As David finished his pep talk, I climbed into the Caterpillar and began navigating it across the thick brush toward the woods. Lowering the bucket, I dug into the thick red soil and began cutting a path. The sun was now bright in the sky, illuminating the rows of hemlock and pine trees that dotted the property. David moved the second bulldozer to the east, using chains to pull fallen hardwoods up to Randy. Juan and Antonio seemed to be in their element, dropping tree after tree with almost expert precision, while Jackson did his best to tackle the smaller stuff, often stopping to untangle himself from briars and other foliage as he plunged deeper into the woods. As the day progressed, the temperature continued its upward climb, and sweat poured from my body in torrents. The sticky humidity of the air clung to me, making the cab of the Caterpillar oppressive. Outside, the sun radiated down on the crew as they continued to clear brush. Despite the North Carolina weather, we'd found our stride and were 3 acres in by noon. Larry held his hand up from the porch, giving the sign for lunch as I parked the cat in a clearing. I jumped down from the heavy dozer and whistled to the kid. Go tell the others it's lunchtime, then go grab some shade. We got 30. The kid gave me a thumbs up and quickly ran into the woodline to inform Jackson, Juan, and Antonio. David was already walking towards the cars with Randy behind him. I made my way about 200 yards up the hill and retrieved my lunchbox from the floorboard of my truck. Together, we huddled under the shade of a group of pine trees. I opened my cooler and removed the pastrami sandwich and cheerwine that I packed during the drive down from West Virginia. Juan removed several flour tortillas from his metal lunchbox, handing a few to his brother, while Jackson pulled the tab on an ice-cold Coors. We ate in silence for a few minutes, allowing the cicadas to serenade us in the hot afternoon sun. The kid watched from behind the group, his eyes betraying his hunger. Hey, kid! Randy barked. Yes, sir. You forget to bring lunch or something? Randy said, scarfing down a sardine. I didn't have a chance to grab anything, the kid replied meekly. What's your story, kid? I said, taking a swig of cheerwine. The kid squinted his eyes, looking up to the sky, his freckled face bearing a look of loss. Not much of a story. Finished high school last year. My father wants me to do something. I guess he thinks I got it too easy, you know. My old man was the same way. It's like a ball-breaking rite of passage, kid. I went to Iraq and still didn't measure up to his expectations, Randy scoffed. Mi padre fue a un bar y nunca regresó, Juan said. Speak English, will ya? David said, annoyed. He says his old man went to the bar and never came back, Jackson replied, pulling the tab of another Coors. David shook his head and laughed. Welcome to the club. The banter was interrupted when Larry came up behind the kid with a bottle of Coke in one hand and a moon pie in the other. His body odor seemed to waft through his stained shirt, making the pastrami sandwich I was eating suddenly undesirable. Larry ducked down to one knee beside the kid, a shit-eating grin plastered across his face. Saw you didn't bring anything to eat and thought you might want these, Larry said, forcing the Coke and moon pie into the kid's hands. The kid looked to us with a face full of bewilderment as Larry moved behind him, placing his hands on the kid's shoulders and massaging them. "I've been watching you, kid. You got supervisor material written all over you. You get done today, you come and see me. We'll talk about your future here." The act was repulsive, but the fact he was doing it in front of us made me recoil in disgust. The faces of the others wore the same sentiment. David threw his half-eaten apple away, while Jackson seemed to close his eyes and down the remainder of his beer. "That's it for lunchtime, I guess," Randy said, standing and interrupting Larry. The rest of us took this cue to stand up as well and move back to the work site. The kid, seizing on the opportunity, brushed off Larry's advances and followed quickly behind. The rest of the day went much like the beginning, the day's heat still unrelenting even as the sun dipped below the horizon. We had managed to clear almost 7 acres and establish 3 large burn piles before Larry gathered us to hand out the per diem cash. After that, I drove back to the motel to take a hot shower before grabbing a meal from the local diner. That night, I slept heavily, the heat of the day still radiating off my body. Dreams of the construction site came to me. I saw the kid's freckled face looking towards the sky as dark storm clouds gathered. Trees swayed back and forth in the fast-approaching storm. Any moment, they would snap and crash down upon me. Then the rain came, slow and large droplets at first, then heavy, unrelenting torrents that mixed with the Carolina red clay. Jackson sat on the dozer's bucket, beer in hand, toasting Randy's severed head. Randy's mouth opened and shut like a fish out of water. His eyes darted back and forth until they fixated on me. "He says it's too cold to stay in the ground," Jackson said, putting the beer to his lips. Antonio came walking out of the woods, his clothes stained orange from the mud. The rain was coming down so hard it felt like needle pricks. "El muerto quiere saquearse," Antonio said, leaning his head back towards the woods. I looked to the woods and saw the kid belly crawling through the mud. He was naked, his teeth shattered, eyes gone. Larry sat under the covered porch of the vacant house with a moon pie in hand. He shrugged his shoulders and smiled as if to say, "You got me." Loud moaning emitted from the forest, a guttural sound that seemed to stretch out and touch me, followed by the cracking of tree limbs. Something large was moving toward me in the woods. My heart pounded. I turned to run, but the mud was too thick. I pumped my legs, attempting to free myself, the moaning growing closer, my mind screaming, "Run! Run now!" I pushed my hands down, reaching for something solid, but finding nothing except the wet clay. "Move! Move, damn it!" The moaning now growing closer, the rain stinging my face. I pushed harder, muscles straining, the tension in my calves tightening, the grasp of ice-cold hands heavy on my shoulders. Then I was awake, calves contracting in pain, causing me to turn to my side to relieve the cramp. I smashed my face deep into the pillow as the muscles tightened and then loosened. A few moments passed and the pain receded, leaving me with the echo of my nightmare. I looked over at the clock on the bedroom table, reading 4:45 a.m. Rolling to my back, I stared up at the ceiling, trying to recall the nightmare. Bits and pieces were still there. The kid, Randy's head, but the details were quickly fading. I laid there for a few minutes longer before finally tossing the covers off and stepping out of bed. The next day, we gathered up and started work. Nothing seemed out of the normal, except the kid was a no-show. I couldn't say I was surprised. It's not uncommon for a person to go AWOL after they realize the job is hard. Hell, I can remember my first day and how my body ached so bad the next morning I thought, fuck this. Goes back to what I said before about being a tough son of a bitch in this line of work. I kept my mind focused on the task at hand and continued to move the caterpillar through the forest. By lunchtime, we had removed most of the brush from the west perimeter and were starting on the east side when Jackson came running up to me, waving his arms. I put the cat in park, lowering the bucket and cutting the engine. Jackson climbed up the track, opening the door to the cab. His face, drenched in sweat, held a look of excitement and wonder. "You gotta see this, man. I think we done found some type of ancient shit." "What the fuck, Jackson?" I replied. "I'm serious, man. Juan and Antonio done found a burial ground or some shit at the back of the property." The CB radio on the cat buzzed to life, David's voice crackling through the static. "What's the holdup over there?" I grabbed the mic and pressed the button to talk. "Juan and Antonio found something needs looking at. Meet me at the back of the property." With that, I dismounted the dozer and followed Jackson through the woods and across an embankment before we came upon a small clearing where Juan and Antonio stood. In the center, a large stone mausoleum stuck out of the ground. At some point, the ground had settled, swallowing the back half of the structure until it resembled a sinking ship. Now, the entrance faced the sky at an angle, an aged and cracked cross at the top. I walked forward, standing on my toes to look down into the entrance, which was concealed by thick strands of kudzu. Randy and David came up behind me, a look of amazement on their faces. "How old do you think it is?" Randy said. "Aquí dice el año 1610, Antonio said, pointing at the side of the mausoleum. Jackson moved to where Antonio pointed. "There's a plaque here, it says 1610. Randy whistled. "Shit, that's before America was even a country." I couldn't explain it, but the air around the mausoleum felt heavy. Shade of the forest canopy was cool, and if I was anywhere else it would be welcoming, but something inside me felt repulsed, an unclean feeling I couldn't explain. I stopped trying to peer inside the entrance, deciding instead to back a few feet away. "So, we're gonna call Channel 9 News? Let people know we just found a big piece of history?" Randy said. "We ain't calling fucking no one," Larry shouted as he pushed past David. Randy, startled by Larry's sudden arrival, turned and responded, "But Larry, it's from the—" Larry raised his hand, stopping Randy in mid-sentence. "Gentlemen, need I remind you that we have a generous payday and bonus on the line? You go calling the news, they'll have this place locked down tighter than a nun's cooch." "Pay or no pay, it's still a person's final resting place," David chimed in. Larry, clearly irritated by David's response, moved closer until he was eye to eye with David. "If one word about this gets out, you'll never work on a project again with this company. You can kiss any references goodbye. That means no moving on to another crew. Hell, you might be lucky if they let you clean the porta-shitters." "You can't do that," David barked. "The fuck I can't. You think I'm playing with you? One call to corporate and I'll have you all blackballed." Randy stepped in the middle of the two, holding his hands up in a motion to calm the situation. "Hang on, guys, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We don't even know if it's occupied." "Occupied?" I questioned. "You know, if there's a dearly departed in there. Hell, the whole thing could be empty and we're arguing over old stones," Randy said, moving towards the entrance of the mausoleum. "How do you intend on finding out if it's occupied?" David asked. Randy removed his phone from his pocket and turned the flashlight on. "Easy, I'll have a look. If it's empty, we take the plaque and turn it in after the project's done. We say we found it on the last day or something." "And if it's not?" I spoke. "We bury him with the plaque somewhere else on the property, somewhere they'll be found by the next crew. Won't be a problem after that," Randy said with a smile. Larry seemed to relent at this proposal, stepping back from David and nodding to Randy. Jackson moved over to the entrance, cupping his hands together to give Randy a boost up. With one last look at us, Randy stuck his foot into Jackson's cupped hands and was hoisted up to the entrance. There he dangled, half in and half out of the mausoleum, using his left arm to anchor against the outside stones. We stood in silence, watching Randy adjust back and forth to get a better look at the interior. His legs straightened and bent back as he balanced his waist on the edge of the entrance. "Well, guys, looks like there's at least one coffin in here," Randy said in a muffled voice. "Fuck," Larry exhaled. "Wait a sec. What the fuck?" Randy said, his voice almost panicked. Randy shifted his weight, pulling a few inches out of the entrance, his shirt snagging against the stone, revealing his bare back. He swung his right leg wildly into the air while his left hand dug deep between the stone crevices. "Get me the fuck out of here!" Randy shouted. Jackson immediately grabbed Randy's leg and began to pull as Juan ran to help. Randy screamed as his body jerked back inside the mausoleum, lifting Jackson off the ground. Juan grabbed Randy's left foot, pulling until the work boot ripped free and he fell to the ground. Then, Randy's body seized violently as a torrent of blood spewed forth from the entrance of the mausoleum. Jackson came crashing to the ground with Randy falling on top. For a second, there was dreadful silence as we all looked down, each of our minds taking a moment to comprehend the scene in front of him. Larry retreated, bumping into a tree as his wide eyes stared back in horror. Randy laid atop Jackson, a dark red stump where his head once was. Blood oozed from the torn neck into Jackson's open mouth and face. From the tomb, an angry guttural growl emitted, and then Randy's head came flying out of the entrance. The head soared through the air, hitting a tree with a heavy clunk and then coming to a stop with Randy's horrified face looking up to the sky. "Get the fuck out of here!" David yelled, turning to run. Jackson scrambled to his feet, wiping the blood from his face. "Wait, I can't see!" he cried. Juan helped Antonio onto his feet, and the two then darted behind David and Larry. I went to help Jackson, but stopped as two massive white hands plunged out of the tomb, followed by a hairless, leathery head with a gore-stained mouth. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. It looked to be a man, but the skin was aged and skeletal. It wore a suit like you would see in the 1950s, but it was rotted and stained. The dead man jumped from the tomb, landing with a loud thud behind Jackson. My God, was it tall? It towered a good 3 feet over Jackson, its eyes cold and black obsidian. Jackson stumbled forward, hands outstretched, reaching for me. I went to grab him, but the dead thing moved unbelievably fast, seizing him by the shoulders. The dead man squeezed hard, its massive hands digging into flesh and muscle. Jackson's face contorted from the pressure as he struggled to free himself. I turned and ran, just as the dead man ripped both arms free from Jackson's body. I had no idea where I was running. My mind was on autopilot as I traversed the embankment, slapping against tree branches and stumbling forward. I could feel the pull of thorns and briars around my feet as I became entangled in a large outcrop of smilax bushes. My heartbeat was fast and my breathing erratic as I jerked my leg to free myself from the bush. "Fuck, fuck, fuck," I said as I dropped to one knee and began to pull the vines free. Then a loud shh came from my side. I looked to my left to see Juan and Antonio partially concealed by a rotted log. Juan looked nervously about and sprung from his hiding place, running next to me. Reaching into his pocket, he retrieved a pocket knife and cut the vines around my feet. Once free, we both hopped back behind the log where Antonio sat. Looking down, I could see Antonio was visibly in pain. A large branch stuck through his belly, broken off at the base. "Se topo con la rama de un árbol," Juan whispered. Somehow, during their escape, Antonio must have run into a tree branch. Juan, being his brother, wouldn't leave him, so the two had hid here until I came. Juan reached down to Antonio, gently rubbing his back. "Está bien, hermanito. Yo contigo." Tears ran down Antonio's cheeks as he shook from fear and pain. I reached into my back pocket for my phone, finding the pocket empty. A sudden realization that I'd left it in the cab of the bulldozer. I instantly turned to Juan and Antonio, making the hand gesture of a phone. Phone? El Fono? Fuck! Juan shook his head no. Nosotros no llevamos teléfonos en el trabajo. Shit, I exclaimed. Sweat dripped down my chin as I looked to the forest for movement. David or Larry must have called the cops by now, I thought. I propped myself up to get a better vantage point on the path I had run down, my eyes sweeping back and forth, then settling on a large oak tree about 30 yards away. From behind the tree, the dead man's head peered out, locking eyes with me. My blood instantly went cold as I fell back. "It knows we're here," I said, looking to Juan. Juan looked to his brother and then back at me. "Amo a mi hermano." He then reached into his pocket, withdrawing the pocket knife and opening the blade. "You go? You call policia?" Juan said, a determined look on his face as he stood. I looked to Antonio, whose eyes were now closed, as Juan motioned with his hands for me to go. With one last glance, I stood and ran from the hiding spot towards the woodline. A sense of guilt followed, making me question if I should return to assist Juan. 2 men might be able to fend it off, but my legs kept pushing me further away. Up ahead, I could see the back of the vacant house only a few yards away. I thought about changing direction towards the dozer, but the path would keep me within the woods, a place I was desperate to be out of. I continued running toward the house, my lungs burning from exertion. The back door was now open, Larry motioning me forward. I ran through the last of the trees and into the backyard, bounding up the steps of the back porch and into the vacant house. Larry slammed the door shut, locking the deadbolt. I fell to the floor, breathing deeply, trying to catch my breath. I pointed towards the door with an unsteady arm. "Juan and Antonio." Larry moved to a window and peered out, and then looked back down to me. "Were they behind you?" I shook my head no, still trying to catch my breath. "I've already called the cops. Just need to sit tight until then." I pushed myself up the wall, my head swirling with exhaustion, and walked down a narrow hallway that opened into a kitchen. I leaned against the worn counters, allowing the coolness of the interior to wash over me. My rest was soon interrupted as Larry came inside the kitchen. "Looks to be all clear out there," he said, taking a few steps towards the sink. My knees grew weak, and I swayed back and forth. I felt nauseous and needed to puke. "Bathroom?" I exclaimed. "Oh, it's back down the hall, first door on your right. Be sure you don't go into the door at the end of the hall. Looks like a raccoon or something was in there shitting all over everything." I nodded thank you and made my way back down the hall, passing the back door and turning to the first door on the right. The bathroom was small with white and black stained tile. A small pedestal sink sat in the center with a medicine cabinet over it. I went to the sink, turning the handle, but no water emerged. I cursed to myself, looking into the medicine cabinet mirror. My face was covered in dirt and grime, something I was used to, but my eyes held a look of uncertainty and fear. The safety of the house felt foreign to me. A smell of mildew mixed with dust permeated the dwelling. Using my t-shirt, I wiped the grime and sweat from my face and exited the bathroom into the hallway. "You okay in there?" Larry's voice echoed from the kitchen. "Yeah, I'm just finishing up. Did the police say when they're getting here?" A silent pause, followed by Larry moving across the kitchen linoleum floor. "Should be any moment. We just gotta sit tight till then," Larry said. I started to walk back towards the kitchen, but paused, looking at the door at the end of the hallway. Curious, I made my way to the door and gently turned the knob, allowing the door to slowly swing open. Large black flies erupted from the room, causing me to step back and cover my mouth. To my horror, David lay on the floor with a small hole in his forehead. I looked up to see the nude, battered body of the kid tied face down on an old bed. Sitting on top of the dresser was a collection of empty Coke bottles and half-eaten moon pies. I jerked the door closed, turning back to look down the hallway. Larry was still in the kitchen. I made my way to the back door, peering out the back window. The dead man stood tall in the backyard, gnawing on a bloody femur bone. It looked at me, smiling through gore-laden lips. I reached down and unlocked the deadbolt, opening the back door slightly. The dead man watched intently, dropping the half-devoured bone and slowly walking toward the door. "That's right, you son of a bitch. Come to Papa," I whispered before turning down the hallway and making my way to the kitchen. As I rounded the corner, I saw Larry, sitting on an old kitchen chair with a .38 in his hand. "What you see back there, Zachy boy?" Larry said in a playful voice. "Nothing, Larry. I just went to the bathroom, that's all." "Oh no, you got that hand in the cookie jar look about you," Larry replied, a smile forming across his lips. A low creaking sound came from my left down the hall, but Larry didn't seem to hear it. The dead man was surely making his way down the hallway, and I was at the end of it facing the barrel of a gun. "Well, what did you see back there, Zach?" Larry said, slamming his open palm on the kitchen counter. "I saw what you did to the kid and David," I replied. "Did I? Oh, yes, I sure did. That boy was just asking for it. You know they all ask for it, right? They come asking for things like a job or to borrow money. That kid came and saw me after work the other day, wanted an advance on his paycheck. Said he wanted to buy some flowers for his mama. Sweet, right?" Another floorboard groaned down the hallway. "Larry, I ain't gonna say anything. We got bigger fish to fry now with that thing out there," I said, inching myself closer towards Larry. Larry leveled the barrel of the gun at me. "Don't come any closer to me, Zach, or I'll put one in your head like I did poor David back there. You know I was in my car about to burn out of here when that dumb fucker ran inside the back door of the house. When I got inside, he'd already discovered my love shack. Put a bullet in him right there." Another footstep, but this time it was heavy and close. "You know, I figure that thing out there might just help get rid of all of you. Then it'll just be another work crew that went AWOL on the project. At least, that's what I'll say if corporate comes knocking." Larry smiled. I swallowed hard and looked to my left, the tall dead man towering over me, its black eyes unwavering in the shadows. I recoiled back, falling against the kitchen wall as it lurched forward, almost grabbing me. Larry, startled by the sudden motion, fired the pistol, the round exploding into the shoulder of the thing. The dead man paused, looking down at me, and then shifting its focus to Larry. Larry went to stand from the chair, but toppled over to the kitchen floor. Panicked, he struggled to get to his feet, the linoleum floor squeaking as he reached for purchase. The dead man took 3 steps toward him, reaching down and grabbing Larry by his hair. Larry cried in pain and dropped the pistol as he was jerked to his feet. The dead man opened his mouth wide, causing Larry to lose control of his bladder. Urine flowed down his leg, collecting into a yellowish puddle on the kitchen floor. His eyes stared back at me, pleading for help. I sat up, looking down the hallway where David and the kid's body lay, and then back to Larry. "Fuck you, Larry," I said, raising my right hand to flip him the bird. I ran down the hallway to the sounds of limbs being torn apart. I jogged past Larry's work truck, stopping to grab one of the 5-gallon fuel canisters. Lifting the canister above my head, I darted to the Caterpillar, climbing onto the track and into the cab. I balanced the fuel canister on my knees as I grabbed my phone and cranked the dozer. The Caterpillar engine roared to life as I reversed the tracks and lined it up towards the house. I raised the bucket to eye level, released the clutch, and the tracks bolted forward as I increased the throttle. The bulldozer was now barreling toward the house at full speed. Thinking fast, I unscrewed the gas canister lid and went to take off my t-shirt, but stopped as it was soaked in sweat. The house was now growing larger in view. I lifted my pants leg, tearing at the seam until the fabric ripped free. I stuffed the cloth into the open container and pulled out the lighter David had thrown to me the previous day. I struck the lighter, igniting the cloth aflame. I raised back up to see the front of the house only a few yards away. The dead man was looking at me through the kitchen window, covered in Larry's entrails. Without another moment to spare, I leapt from the bulldozer and crashed hard to the ground. The impact was painful, and I could hear the crack of bone as I tumbled through the red mud. The bulldozer smacked into the house with a loud crash, pushing forward into the kitchen until the weight of the floor buckled and the cat fell into the basement. Yellow and orange flames erupted from the open cavity of the home as the canister exploded. The roof of the house leaned forward, collapsing where the bulldozer had plowed through. Flames licked at the dried wood, igniting other fluids inside the bulldozer until the home was turned into a giant inferno. I lay there in pain and exhaustion for several minutes until the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. The evening sun licked at my exposed skin as I closed my eyes, breathing a sigh of relief. The alarm on my watch went off as a big smile broke across my face. My workday was officially over. You've just heard Something Ate My Work Crew at the Old Reed Place by Shane H. Sellers. Shane Sellers is not just an avid writer. He is a maestro of the macabre, specializing in tales of the wicked and sinister that stalk in the shadows of the mind. As the imaginative force behind the Carrion Creature Feature YouTube channel, Shane breathes life into his dark tales, leaving audiences stunned with every blood-soaked word. And with that, my friends, we're done for tonight. I hope that you enjoyed Shane's debut on the show, and if you did, you can find more of his work over at Velux Books, www.veloxbooks.com. We might even feature more of his work on the show in the future. After all, who knows what dastardly horrors the future holds for us? Well, I happen to know that one of those horrors will be me, returning for more Horror Hill next week at the same day and time. I'd love for you to join me, and you can even bring a friend if you like. After all, there's nothing quite like a mid-episode snack, now is there? Until next time, friends, stay spooky. You've been listening to the Horror Hill Podcast, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Tonight's episode was hosted and narrated by yours truly, Erik Peabody. Original music provided by Erik Peabody and Nikki McSorley. Finalization by Erik Peabody and Craig Groshek. Got a terrifying tale of your own that you'd like performed? Email it to us at natalie@chillingtalesfordarknights.com to have your work considered for future production. Seeing as how we're all living in a technological nightmare of our own devising, I'll ask you to follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights on social media and upvote, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon if you're listening to this on YouTube. Not only will you have appeased the dark gods of cyberspace, but you'll be kept in the loop as we prepare more terrifying content. If you'd like access to uninterrupted horror, free of ads and these annoying bookend segments, might I recommend becoming a patron? You'll get access to hundreds of episodes of this show, as well as everything from the other programs in the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights cabal. That means all of Otis Chiri's Scary Stories Told in the Dark, Drew Blood's Dark Tales, Paul J. McSorley's Fear from the Heartland, and more. It's a veritable smorgasbord of horrific delights. As for me personally, I'm on most social media as Viking Guitar or Viking Guitar Productions. I'm always on the lookout for new stories to narrate and new music projects to mix or master. If that's of interest to you, feel free to reach out and we can talk turkey. Also, I will be back next week with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. If darkness is what you're after, listener, your search is over. Yet, let it be known, you haven't found the darkness. The darkness has found you.
Chilling tales for dark nights.